Hello and welcome back to part 2. So we've talked about cost, speed, and availability as things that we want to manage on our network. How do we manage them? Well, certainly on the WAN side, I said you're entirely dependent on your provider, and the way you manage it is through an SLA, through a service level agreement, which is a document similar to a contract in terms of outlining the duties and obligations of both parties that sign the agreement. It's not a one-way document, it's two-way. So for example, if you're asking the vendor to commit to availability measurements, you might need to agree to make your network available to the vendor, at least maybe to your router or your firewall, wherever the legal demarc is between your organizations. I do strongly suggest that there should be penalties built into your SLA if these QoS metrics are not met. But if you want to be a nice guy, and this works too, you can build in bonuses. So if the vendor exceeds your expectations, that you build in a monthly bonus. So the SLA is what drives everything. It's possible to have an internal SLA just with your internal employees. Using ITIL language, this is called an operating level agreement, an OLA, but it serves the same purpose. An SLA is typically with an external provider. And please don't be that person that, when the vendor is negotiating with you and they ask you how much uptime you want, say, well, I want 100% uptime. You can't have that. It's just impossible. You can have 99.99999, but there's going to be downtime. And of course, the more nines you want, the higher cost it is. You could probably have something very, very close to 100% uptime, but it would require so much redundancy and so much expense that it would be cost prohibitive. And again, that's the business case that you have to make with your business owners. To make sure you understand their business requirements to make the right decision about the technology you need. If you've never seen an SLA before, I've got 2 links that show you example SLAs just so you can see what an SLA looks like. It can be 1 page, might be 5 pages. It really shouldn't be more than 10 pages. That's getting a little too long with legalese. An SLA should be short and sweet with very measurable metrics in it. Switching gears now to talk about, this is another aspect of network management in my book, is just how to draw out your network in order to kind of figure out where all the bottlenecks are, how everything connects in together. You're going to have an assignment pretty soon using Microsoft Visio. I'm sorry, I hate Microsoft Visio, but it's what most people use, and you have to learn how to do a network diagram with it. When I'm doing a network diagram, I typically start with the most important device and put it in the center. And if you're a networking person, the most important device is your router, your core router. Put that in the middle of the diagram, and then just kind of work your way out from there to the edges. Make sure you're using standardized icons, so the cloud icon, obviously. For a router is a circle with 2 arrows on it. A switch is a square with 2 arrows on it. In Visio, you'll see an icon for an Ethernet bus. I don't use that. It's cumbersome and doesn't make any sense. A lot of times use lightning bolts for wireless connectivity, or maybe a dashed line. But whether you solid lines, dashed lines, or colored lines, make sure you have a legend at the bottom of your network diagram that explains. And that's and once you're comfortable doing this, of course, add network diagramming to your resume. And some examples. Here's a good diagram in that it's simple. It shows exactly how we connect to the internet. There's my router, my switch, how the PCs connect. Notice the IP addresses everywhere. That's very helpful on a network diagram. Make sure you don't try to include everything like this. It's impossible. If you put every aspect of your network on a single page, it's going to be unusable. So don't create garbage like this. You don't necessarily have to manually create a network diagram. There are tools out there. HP OpenView, whatever they call it now, has an auto discovery tool. A lot of these network management packages have automated tools that'll discover your network really just using ping and traceroute in the background to figure out where everything is. Then you can kind of drag these nodes around to make them pretty and create a network map that way. I've never found one that makes as good a map as I can make. I'm a big fan of doing it manually. So this is far and away a network engineer's best friend, the whiteboard. So here's my first principle of good network design. Always, always, always use a whiteboard when planning. That's the reason why I have a whiteboard in my office. That's the reason why if you ask me a networking question, the first thing I'm going to do is either grab a piece of paper and a pen and sketch it out to make sure I understand what you're asking me, or I'm going to go to the whiteboard and draw it out. That's the only way to figure out networking issues. I read an article on Tech Republic that suggested this, and I wish I had done this when I was hiring people. They said one of the best ways to interview somebody is just to hand them a whiteboard marker and say, can you draw up your last network that you supported? That separates the adults from the children when it comes to network management. If you can draw out your network on a whiteboard and then let the interviewer ask you questions about, okay, how did this connect? Why did you have this? What's doing DHCP? Where's your NAT? Where is everything? That's impressive. And that would be a very short and sweet interview, and very successful interview. Back to, this is probably a subtopic under SLAs, but network traffic is bursty. We've talked about, it's bursty. It's not constant. Sorry, it's constant. It's bursty. Anyway, one of the things you can do to manage this, one way is to over-provision your circuit, which means to buy more capacity than you need in order to be able to handle those peaks. But that's really wasteful. Nobody does that. A better way is through quality of service settings on your network equipment. Sometimes this is called QoS, sometimes it's called traffic shaping. But the idea is to assign priorities to different types of traffic. So, for example, you'd want voice over IP traffic to have a very high priority, so there's no latency there. Email does not need nearly as high priority. BitTorrent shouldn't have any priority at all. In fact, it should be blocked. But if you're going to allow it, make that the lowest priority thing on your network. Same thing with games or Facebook or social media that you might assign a lower priority to. So that's what traffic shaping is all about. This is also something that you can build into your service level agreement, and it's called a committed information rate, a CIR. So that's kind of the minimum amount that the telco is committing to, but then there will be language in there for how high above the CIR your traffic can burst temporarily. Again, you need to get specific in the SLA. So far we've been talking about kind of network monitoring as an aspect of management: speed, errors, quality of service, and SLAs. So now we're switching gears into security management, which is related. With security management, I brought up this slide in Chapter 3 because I wanted you to go ahead and see it, that when you're talking about security, a lot of companies go through this cycle. You need to have some kind of map, some kind of framework for how you're addressing security concerns. The first step is looking at the environment and documenting all the potential threats. There's a long list. There are 12 categories of threats that we get into in the information security class in the spring. And then planning, which is where everybody should be spending the bulk of their time. 80% of your time should be put into security planning. Sadly, what happens is 80% of our time goes into kind of not just protecting, but responding to oopses, which indicates a lack of planning, and then responding to the inevitable incidents, whether it's a security breach, an oops, a natural disaster, what have you, and then taking those lessons learned and feeding that in a feedback loop back into your planning to improve the process. So that's the way it should work. Planning is what we're talking about in this chapter, and so there are a few planning principles that we're going to get into specifically here. We said this about protecting, and we talked about this in the last chapter. responding to incidents. It happens. You can't assume that you're not going to have an incident. I would, if you don't remember any of the other security planning principles in this chapter, please remember that security is a management issue, not a technology issue. The people who care about security breaches is upper management, because they're the ones that have to pay the penalty, pay the fine. They're the ones that lose money whenever there's a breach. So it would be a fallacy to think that that security is IT's problem. Well, the IT department has a security department, therefore it's IT's problem. No, it's everybody's problem, and especially the business owners. So with that, some principles for planning out your security decisions, because security is always a trade-off. It's always a trade-off, and we get into this in the 495 class, a trade-off between good security and good usability. So you can sacrifice productivity for better security. And every company makes a different decision about this trade-off. The first step is, or the first principle here is doing a risk analysis. The idea here is that you don't spend $1 to protect a dime. You want to reduce the risk to a degree that's economically reasonable, which means first step is you have to understand the financial value of the information that you're trying to protect. That's where the business leaders come in handy. They're the ones that can tell you that. You don't know that. You're the network manager. You have no idea what the information is worth. You need your business partners to tell you that. So once you have some numbers, then you can start making some decisions about how much money to spend on security infrastructure. Just remember business requirements. That's what's driving every decision. Number 2 is comprehensive security. There are many, many, many ways to get into the castle, if you will. The front door, the back door, swimming across the moat, leaping across the wall, however you want to think about it. That comprehensive security means not closing all the doors, but putting a guard at every door, every possible mode of ingress into the network. That's what comprehensive security is. Comprehensive security is different from number 3, which is defense in depth. Defense in depth means you have different layers. And I equate this to, again, the castle metaphor, where you have maybe a central tower. Around the tower, you've got walls, and on the walls you've got corner towers, and around the walls you've got a moat, and around the moat you've got another wall, and you have layers that if the barbarians get through one layer, there's another layer that they have to get through. So there's not just one single thing keeping out the bad guys. And so your firewall is not your single form of protection. It's just not. I used to go into the castle metaphor in a very detailed way because I think it's a useful metaphor. And last semester I realized I'm probably doing students a disservice to use this old-fashioned castle metaphor. And the reason is this. I think having a mental model of a castle with a moat around it, with a firewall around your perimeter, is an old-fashioned way of thinking about your network, because now you need to think about a fluid perimeter. And it's hard to come up with a picture of a fluid perimeter, but this refers to all the different ways your users can get into the network through mobile VPN, how your vendors get into the network, how customers get into certain parts of your network, that you're putting different levels of security on different parts of your network, and the boundary of your network is really constantly shifting, because you might have, say, an extranet with several suppliers, and it's kind of hard to really nail down where one network stops and where the next one where theirs begins, because it's fluid. So please keep in mind this idea of a fluid perimeter, especially grad students that are going to take the exit exam. But I've said too much. Let's see. Number 4 is identifying the weakest link. But let me stop here because I'm limited to like 15-minute segments on YouTube. So let me stop here and pick up with part 3 in just a second. Bye.